As a security officer, it was my job to keep an eye on the crowd and make sure everyone stayed safe. I remember the night of that football match in Florida like it was yesterday. It was a warm summer evening, and the stadium was packed with eager fans ready to cheer on their favorite teams. But as the game got underway, I began to notice something strange happening in the stands. A hush had fallen over the crowd, and people were turning to look at something behind them. At first I thought it might be a fight or some other kind of disturbance, but as I looked closer, I realized that something far more unusual was happening. There, standing at the top of the stands, was a figure dressed in old-fashioned clothing. He was wearing a long black coat and a top hat, and he seemed to be staring down at the field with a look of intense concentration. At first, I assumed it was just a fan dressed up in a costume, but as I watched, I began to feel a sense of unease creep over me. There was something about the figure's posture and demeanor that seemed otherworldly, as if he didn't quite belong in our time or place. As the game went on, I kept my eye on the figure, watching as he stood motionless in the same spot, never moving or speaking to anyone around him. It was as if he was in a trance, lost in some kind of mystical reverie. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the figure vanished. One moment he was there, and the next he was gone, leaving me to wonder if I had imagined the entire thing. It wasn't until later that night, as I was walking back to my car, that I saw the figure again. This time he was standing in the parking lot, just a few feet away from me. I froze, unsure of what to do, as he slowly turned his head to look at me. For a moment we locked eyes, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. There was something about the figure's gaze that seemed to penetrate right through me, as if he could see into my very soul. And then, just as suddenly as before, he vanished into thin air. I was left standing there alone in the parking lot, my heart racing and my mind reeling from what I had just seen. To this day, I still don't know who or what that figure was, or what he wanted from me. But I do know that he left a lasting impression on me, and that I'll never forget the eerie encounter I had at that football match in Florida all those years ago. I remember the day well. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in 2007, and I was patrolling the trails of Rocky Mountain National Park. As a seasoned park ranger, I had seen my fair share of strange happenings in the wilderness, but what I encountered that day still sends shivers down my spine. I was hiking along a remote section of the park, enjoying the solitude and the beauty of the changing leaves, when I heard a strange noise in the distance. It was a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo off the rocks and trees. I assumed it was a bear or a mountain lion and started to make my way back to my truck, but as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. It was a figure, moving swiftly through the underbrush. At first I thought it was a hiker, but as I got a closer look, I realized it was something else entirely. The figure was tall and thin, with long, spindly arms and legs. It had no discernible features, no face or hair, just a dark, amorphous shape. I froze, unsure of what to do. The thing seemed to be watching me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was malevolent. I took a step back, and the thing darted forward, moving impossibly fast. It was almost as if it was gliding across the ground, defying the laws of physics. I knew I had to get out of there, but my legs felt like lead. Suddenly, the thing let out another growl, louder and more menacing than before. This time it was joined by a chorus of other growls, howls, and snarls. I realized with a sickening feeling that I was surrounded. I tried to back away, but the creatures closed in, their glowing eyes fixed on me. I could see now that they were not animals, but something else entirely. They were humanoid with twisted, distorted features and long, sharp claws. They moved with fluid grace, almost like dancers, but there was nothing graceful about the way they looked at me. I fumbled for my radio, desperate to call for backup, but it was dead. I was on my own. I don't know how long I stood there staring into those glowing eyes, but eventually, the creatures backed away. They disappeared into the trees, leaving me alone in the clearing. I was trembling with fear and adrenaline, but I managed to stumble back to my truck and drive back to base. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I didn't think they would believe me, and I didn't want to seem like a coward. But the experience stayed with me, haunting me every time I patrolled those woods. Years later, I heard stories from other rangers about similar encounters. They spoke of strange creatures, unlike anything they had ever seen before, lurking in the depths of the park. Some called them skinwalkers, while others had no name for them at all. I don't know what those creatures were, or why they chose to reveal themselves to me that day. But I do know one thing: the wilderness can be a dangerous, unpredictable place. And sometimes, the things that go bump in the night are more than just your imagination. I was a park ranger at Rocky Mountain National Park for over a decade, and I've seen some pretty strange things during my time there. But one night, in the dead of winter, I experienced something that I can't explain. It was a particularly snowy night, and I was on my way back to my cabin after a long day of patrolling the park. The snow was coming down hard, and the wind was picking up, making it difficult to see more than a few feet in front of me. As I made my way down the trail, I realized that I had taken a wrong turn and was completely lost. I tried retracing my steps, but the snow had covered any signs or markers that could have pointed me in the right direction. As I trudged through the snow, I suddenly heard a faint whispering sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but as I listened closer, I realized that it sounded like someone was calling my name. "Ranger, Ranger." The voice was coming from somewhere nearby, but I couldn't tell where. I called out, hoping to get a response, but there was nothing, just the sound of the wind and the snow crunching under my feet. I kept walking, hoping that I would stumble upon a familiar landmark or sign, but the whispering continued. It was growing louder and more insistent, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Finally, I came upon a clearing in the woods. In the center of the clearing was a small cabin, and the whispering seemed to be coming from inside. I hesitated for a moment, but the voice was so clear and urgent that I had to investigate. I cautiously approached the cabin and pushed open the door. Inside, it was warm and inviting, with a roaring fire in the fireplace and a table set for dinner, but there was no one there. I called out again, but there was no response. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something moving outside. I looked out the window and saw a figure in the snow, moving slowly toward the cabin. At first, I thought it was just a hiker or another ranger who had also gotten lost. But as the figure got closer, I could see that there was something off about it. It was humanoid, but its movements were strange and jerky, almost like a marionette being controlled by strings, and its face was blank and featureless, like a porcelain doll. I was frozen in fear, unable to move as the figure approached the cabin. It stopped just outside the door, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, it lunged forward, reaching for me with its featureless hands. I stumbled backward, trying to get away, but I tripped and fell, hitting my head on the corner of the table. When I came to, the cabin was empty. The fire had burned down to embers, and there was no sign of the figure or any of the dinner that had been set out. I stumbled out into the snow, still disoriented and shaken. But as I made my way back to the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just experienced something truly otherworldly. To this day, I don't know what I saw that night. Some say it was the ghost of a long-dead ranger, while others believe it was a creature from another dimension. But whatever it was something that I will never forget. I was working the night shift as a police officer, patrolling the quiet streets of my small town. It was a peaceful night, and I was feeling good. I had just finished my third cup of coffee and was feeling alert and ready for anything. That's when I realized my phone was missing. I checked my pockets, but it wasn't there. I must have dropped it somewhere on my rounds. I made a mental note to retrace my steps later and find them. As I continued driving, I noticed something strange out of the corner of my eye. A figure was standing in the middle of the road up ahead. It was too dark to make out any features, but I could tell it was human. I stopped the car and got out, calling out to the figure. But there was no response. As I got closer, I could see that the figure was wearing an old-fashioned police uniform, like something out of the 1920s. I approached cautiously, but the figure didn't move. When I was just a few feet away, it suddenly vanished into thin air. I was startled but shook it off as a trick of the light. But as I continued my rounds, strange things started happening. I heard whispers in my ear, but when I turned around, no one was there. I saw shadows moving on their own and doors opening and closing by themselves. Then I saw the figure in the old-fashioned police uniform again. This time it was standing by the side of the road watching me. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I knew that something was not right. I decided to investigate further and pulled over to get a closer look. As I approached, the figure started to move, as if beckoning me to follow. I hesitated, but my curiosity got the better of me and I followed it. It led me to an old abandoned police station that had been closed for decades. The figure disappeared, and I was left alone in the dark, musty building. As I made my way through the station, I could feel a heavy presence in the air. It was as if the building was alive with some kind of malevolent energy. Then I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of old-fashioned police radios crackling to life. But the voices coming from the radios were not of this time. They were the voices of long-dead police officers, communicating with each other as if they were still on duty. I could feel their eyes on me, and I knew that I was not alone. I turned to run, but something caught my foot and I fell to the ground. When I looked up, I saw the figure in the old-fashioned police uniform standing over me, its eyes blazing with an otherworldly light. I tried to get up, but I was paralyzed with fear. The figure reached down and picked up my missing phone, holding it out to me. Then it vanished once again, leaving me alone in the haunted police station. From that day on, I never went on night duty again. I could never explain what happened that night, but I knew that I had encountered something otherworldly and beyond my understanding. And as long as I live, I will never forget the haunted police station and the figure in the old-fashioned police uniform that haunted it.